If Trump were to disengage from a US Iran war without achieving clearly defined or widely recognized objectives, the consequences would ripple far beyond the immediate theater. The issue would not simply be withdrawal, but how that withdrawal is perceived by allies, adversaries, and neutral states. In international politics, perception often matters as much as capability. The central concern is this: deterrence is not just about power, it is about credibility. And credibility depends on whether threats are followed through and whether commitments appear reliable over time. A US disengagement without tangible gains would therefore raise serious questions about American deterrence. But the effects would vary significantly across regions. I will cover it in 9 parts. 1. Impact on US deterrence credibility. Immediate perception, that is, credibility gap. If the US enters a war with strong rhetoric and ambitious goals, then exits without achieving them, it creates what strategists call a credibility gap. Adversaries may conclude the US is reluctant to sustain costly conflicts. Next, escalation threats may not be fully credible. Time and resistance can outlast American pressure. This does not mean the US becomes weak, but it means its threats become discounted rather than taken seriously. Historical echoes. This kind of outcome would inevitably be compared to past experiences. Vietnam, Iraq War, war in Afghanistan. In each case, the US retained overwhelming military superiority, but adversaries learned that endurance could offset that superiority. A similar lesson from Iran would reinforce a pattern. And which would be that pattern? The US can strike hard but may not stay long enough to impose outcomes. Next, not total collapse of deterrence. It is important to stay grounded. US nuclear deterrence remains intact. Conventional superiority remains overwhelming. Global military presence continues. So deterrence would not collapse, but it would become more conditional and situational. Impact on Israel. For Israel, the implications would be immediate and serious. Strategic anxiety. Israel depends heavily on US military backing. Diplomatic protection, deterrence umbrella. If the US appears unwilling to follow through in a major regional conflict, sustain pressure on a key adversary, Israel may conclude it must rely more heavily on self help strategies. Increased risk taking. This could lead to more unilateral military actions, preemptive strikes against perceived threats, lower threshold for escalation. In other words, reduced confidence in US backing may actually make the region more unstable, not less. Nuclear dimension. Though rarely discussed openly, a weakened perception of US deterrence could intensify debates within Israel about long term strategic guarantees, reinforce reliance on its own strategic deterrent, impact on Gulf states. For Gulf monarchies like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, the effects would be profound. Crisis of confidence. These states have long depended on US security guarantees, protection against Iran. Perceived US retreat would trigger doubts about American reliability, fear of abandonment in future crises. Strategic hedging. We would likely see accelerated hedging behavior, diplomatic engagement with Iran, diversification towards China and Russia, independent military buildup. This trend is already underway but would intensify in the near future. Regional realignment. Gulf states may reduce confrontation with Iran, seek regional de escalation mechanisms, pursue balance rather than alignment. This marks a shift from US centric security to multi vector diplomacy. Impact on Europe. For Europe, the consequences would be more political than immediate. Security related but still significant. Reinforcement of strategic autonomy. Debate. European states have long debated reducing dependence on US security, building independent defense capacity. A US withdrawal without success would strengthen arguments for strategic autonomy, increase investment in European defense structures. NATO cohesion questions. While NATO would not collapse, concerns would grow. Would the US sustain commitment in a prolonged crisis? How liable is US leadership under political pressure? Policy divergence. Europe may take more independent positions in Middle East policy, avoid deep involvement in future US led conflicts. Impact on East Asia. This is arguably the most strategically important region affected. Countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan closely watch US behavior in other regions. Signal to China. For China, the lesson may be the US is reluctant to sustain long conflicts. Political pressure can limit US escalation. Time favors the defender. This could influence calculations regarding Taiwan, risk tolerance in regional disputes. Allied anxiety. US allies in Asia may begin to question, will the US intervene decisively in a crisis? Will it sustain that intervention if it becomes costly? Military and nuclear implications. Political outcomes that would be increased defense spending, expanded missile and deterrence capabilities, renewed debate about independent nuclear options, especially in South Korea and Japan. Impact on adversaries. Beyond allies, adversaries would draw powerful lessons. One, validation of asymmetric strategy. Iran's endurance would reinforce a key principle. You don't need to defeat the US, you just need to outlast it. This would influence non state actors, regional powers, rival states. Second point in this regard, encouragement of risk taking. Adversaries may push boundaries more aggressively, test US red lines, increase hybrid warfare tactics, the information warfare dimension. Perception would be amplified globally. Narratives would emerge that the United States failed to achieve objectives. Iran resisted successfully. American power has limits. Even if partially inaccurate, these narratives matter because deterrence operates in the mind, not just on the battlefield. 8. Counterbalancing factors. It is important not to exaggerate the impact. US structural power remains largest military budget, advanced technology, global alliance network, framing matters. If the US frames withdrawal as strategic recalibration, limited objective achieved, the damage can be mitigated. Selective deterrence. The US may double down in other regions. For example, East Asia. Reinforce commitments elsewhere. Now we come to the final assessment. If the US walks away without significant gains, short term effects, credibility damage, allied anxiety, adversary confidence boost, medium term effects, increased hedging by allies, regional instability, especially Middle East, greater autonomy in Europe, long term effects, gradual erosion of deterrence, credibility, acceleration towards multipolarity, more contested global order, and now the final conclusion. A US disengagement without clear success would not end American power, but it would reshape how that power is perceived and calculated. The most important shift would be this: the United States would still be feared, but still automatically not trusted and less unquestionably believed. And in deterrence, fear without credibility is unstable. Power without perceived resolve is discounted. Bottom line, if Trump walks away without achieving major objectives, the world would not see a weak America, but it would see a more constrained, cautious, and more challengeable America. That subtle shift is enough to embolden adversaries, unsettle allies, and accelerate the transition towards a more balanced world order. Thank you very much for patient hearing and supporting this independent source of information and analysis. Please subscribe if you have not done so.